Hello and welcome to News Central Television. I am Lekan Onabanjo. The top stories at this hour. Nigeria's private sector states fault Labour's push for 1 million naira minimum wage. UN shows concern, seeks probe of delayed election in Senegal. South Africa's Minister Naledi Pandor accuses Israeli intelligence of targeting her family. Details to come your way shortly. We begin in West Africa, where Nigeria's service chiefs and security heads on Tuesday appeared at the Senate to discuss the state of the country's security. The meeting was billed for last week but was rescheduled to this week because of the absence of some security heads. The security chiefs present were Christopher Musa, Chief of Defense Staff, Taurid Ladbaja, Chief of Army Staff, Emmanuel Ogala, Chief of Naval Staff, and Hassan Abubakar, Chief of Air Staff. Nuhu Ribadu, National Security Advisor, Kayode Betokun, Inspector General of Police, and Yusuf Bichi, Director General of the Department of State Services, were also present. Also present were the Ministers of Finance, Interior, and Defense. Over the past few weeks, there have been an uptick in killings and abductions for ransom in many parts of the country, including the Federal Capital Territory. To further discuss this, I'm joined by a security expert, Salahuddin Hashim, and he'll be talking to us about this. Thank you so much for joining us on the news.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, meetings with service chiefs have almost become a monthly ritual in Nigeria, right from the time of the past immediate administration, but no concrete result in curbing insecurity has been recorded. So is it too late to secure the country from acts of criminality?
Unfortunately, it is not too late to do the securitization, but what is not going out very correctly is about the manner within which we handle the entire process. And like I mentioned in previous sessions, that our security is actually interactive, and we know where the challenges truly lies. The challenges are not basically with the capability of our troops to respond, but what is actually lacking is how we put in those non-kinetic programming in place to manage the prevent component of what we currently see. Security agencies are not magicians. What they do is that they leverage on existing infrastructure to respond. And when government itself is working across purposes, then of course it creates the kind of setback that we see. If you look at the pyramid of human security, there are about several indicators that suggest how to measure fragility. And across board, and it is very clear that across those fragile components, we are not doing very well at all. And that matrix suggests that even the parliament has the responsibility to be able to do appropriation around them. And how do you also bring security agencies into a conversation when you also have a primary gap that you are not managing properly? And one of them, I will give you an example, is the issue that borders around personnel and how you attach them to VIPs. Even the IG in recent time had also tried to evade a question regarding that. Most of these members of the House of Reps that we have nothing less than 3 to 6 personnel attached to them as individuals. Some of them have their wives also being escorted around by personnel. Some of them have their children and their own facilities also enjoying this kind of security. And that also excludes basically multinationals and all of those commercial entities that also enjoy those privileges. So if you do some kind of analysis around it, you realize that 1/3 of the entire security personnel that should actually be benefiting the generality of the people are actually being privatized.
Okay.
And that is where the conversation around the privatization of security comes in, the privatization, the commercialization, and the politicization of security is something that we need to look at. We can't work on existing templates. The template has to change. And what can change on this template is if we actually look at that ratio critically. Currently, we have about 1 to about 10,000 in terms of the security ratio, policing ratio in Nigeria. The UN standard says it is 1 to 400, and we have much more than that, about 1 to 10,000. And I think this is something that we need to pay critical attention to. So there are ungoverned spaces, there are lots of gaps around the human security pyramid, and that is the area that the parliamentarians should be looking at.
Salahuddin, sorry to cut in. Now that you've been able to establish that the security architecture in the country is overstretched, is it also underfunded?
Yeah, no matter how you put in money, defense spending generally across the globe is evolving. You can't overspend for defense. As a matter of fact, it is something that we'll say is inadequate. But the question remains, what you put currently, how judicious and how efficient are they being applied? I mean, that for me should be the question we should be asking ourselves. I think there are some level of accountability challenge that we also need to address. And that is the reason why within the sector that people prefer to roll out tanks rather than to respond to the non-kinetic mechanisms that help to prevent incidences from occurring, because they know too well that rolling out tanks offer open checks to everybody who is actually within the value chain. So the entire logistics also benefits from the whole process. But if you have to deal with the preventive components that deals with all of it, it means that, you have to be doing about peace building, what are those food security, health and environmental security components of it, which oftentimes does not benefit too many persons.
Okay.
So it is very important that we look at the interaction between the security components, see what we can do to deal with them decisively.
Yeah, so I think that is where, Salahuddin, I think that's where we need to go now. So beyond rhetorics, let's break it down. At the Senate plenary, we had the Chief of Defense Staff, the Chief of Army Staff, the Chief of Naval, and the Chief of Air Staff. We had the NSA, the IGP, the DG for DSS, and some other heads of security present at the plenary with the Senate. So what are the interdependent roles that these chiefs should be playing when we talk about tackling insecurity issues in the country?
I think one of the major issues that must happen as a matter of urgency is for us to deal with the economic crisis that is actually pervading the country. Once that happens, then you realize that you have been able to deal substantially with issues that borders around insecurity. We need to also localize the issue of industrialization, because if you don't do that, and a lot of the times it is always a subject of conversation both within the scholar community and of course practitioner environment around how the issue of insecurity continues to fester, and the reason why that happens is because there are gaps between policies and programs, and that in itself affects human existence. And if you look at the pyramid of human security, you realize that there is always a competition where resources particularly leverage. Look at North Central, for instance, because of the issue that borders around the agrarian community and the farmers-herders conflict. Look at the issue that borders around the resources in the Niger Delta. Look at the Northeast. And so you realize that there is a component of deposits, of competition for resources that has consistently facilitated the kind of concerns that we have seen. So one thing that must happen is that we must actually plan, and our planning is something that must match our programming. If we do not plan as a parliament to manage the crisis that currently goes on in the country, and I think the former president made an attempt to bring a proximity between planning and the ministry that borders around national population. But that, unfortunately, didn't turn out well. So there must be some level of connection between how we plan and how we respond. Two is our budgeting system. How have we been able to put our budgeting system for impact? And I think that is also not happening. We are not budgeting for impact. We are only budgeting perhaps to be able to satisfy certain economic community. That in itself needs to be responded to.
Now, Salahuddin, I understand. So now, at these critical points that we have gotten to, would it be wise to say that there is the need to call for a state of emergency, for the presidency to declare a state of emergency, because we have seen an uptick in killings and abductions for ransom in some parts or many parts of the country, as the case is, including the Federal Capital Territory. So should the president be doing that right now?
Absolutely. We have all the indicator of a fragile state, and that in itself is obvious and you cannot controvert it. Nigeria is fragile. It may not be a failed state yet, but we have all the elements of a fragile state, and that in itself requires that we declare a state of emergency, particularly on the issue of security. And that requires that if you must do that, it has to be from financial to political to operations and all the issues that borders around procurement. Because until you reduce the opportunistic component in securitization, you may not be able to completely eliminate those facilitators. And the merchants of war sometimes are not outside the system. Sometimes they are within the system. And because there is already a very large economy around it, they want to continue to advance it. And I think it is important.
So what about the establishment of a state police? Do you think that could also work? And could it be cost effective too?
Currently, about 15 states have legislated for state policing, and that for me is something that we need to pay attention to. 15 states with over 50,000 recruits already, and I think that is actually very worrisome. The question that readily comes to mind is the states and the Nigerian police particularly providing a checklist for this policing infrastructure that we are having? I would prefer that we have the state policing structure first and test it for a while before we contemplate the state police component. Now, state policing and state police are two different things. The state policing is what we're already doing. For instance, we have the Amotekun. For instance, we have some other platforms across the state who are helping to police the system. That is the kind of thing we should have. And that is the kind of thing that we already have about 15 states who have legislated, and that in itself is a worrisome number. With over 50,000, how have we been able to profile? How have we been able to manage? How have we been able to operationalize? All of this interaction requires a lot of energy and effort for us to be able to advance it further. But yes, state policing is rife, and we must advance it in a way that is sacrosanct, managed, and thoroughly oversighted. Otherwise, we will have additional problems at our hand.
Well, we hope not too. Salahuddin Hashim, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
We move on now to tell you that the President of the Senate, Godswill Akpabio, on Tuesday administered the oath of office on 3 new senators who recently won by-elections in their respective districts. They are Prince Pam Mwatkon, Action Democratic Party for Plateau North, Professor Anthony Ani, All Progressives Congress, Ebonyi South, and Mustafa Musa, All Progressives Congress, Yobe East. They were subsequently led to their respective seats after the swearing-in during plenary in Abuja. The atmosphere was charged with excitement and anticipation as the senators-elect filed into the Senate chamber, ready to embark on their new roles as representatives of their respective senatorial districts. And away from that, the organized private sector, Ekiti, Sokoto, and other states have faltered the demand by the Nigeria Labour Congress for 1 million naira minimum wage, stating that it is not realistic. The NLC president, Joe Ajaero, on Monday said the organized labor might ask for 1 million naira during the minimum wage negotiations with the federal government if the value of the naira continued to plummet. Reacting to the proposal, the Minister of Information and National Orientation, Idris Mohammed, said the federal government would make a reasonable decision in line with national interest and after due consideration of available resources and other factors. In the past months, the costs of goods and services had skyrocketed following the removal of the fuel subsidy. Earlier, human rights lawyer Ekene Henry shared his thoughts on this.
Generally, that in labor relations, it is the right of workers to earn reasonable wage stays. And beyond that, the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria 1999 has the economic objective in our Constitution under Section 16, and particularly subsection 2, paragraph D, to the effect that there shall be a reasonable national minimum living wage. So it's a response to the realities that citizens and workers are confronted with in an economy, in a society, as Nigeria is at the moment. So it's reasonable to make that kind of projection and demand. And whether it is realizable, yes, it is. I think there have been reports and deliberations in this country with respect to how to economically and effectively manage our resources to be able to enhance and improve the welfare of citizens.
In the meantime, organized labor has protested at the headquarters of the National Agency for Food, Drug Administration and Control over the ban and shutdown of production lines of companies manufacturing alcoholic drinks in sachets and small bottles below 200 millimeters. The unions have rejected the ban on the production of alcoholic beverages in sachets and small bottles by the federal government, saying no fewer than 45,000 jobs and billions of naira investments are at risk of going down the drain.
Fucked up. The issues are very clear. We are here to protest over NAFDAC's interference in our means of livelihood. We are not saying NAFDAC should not regulate, but regulate with human face. Yes. A situation whereby you regulate or deregulate and throw millions of Nigerians into abject poverty. Are you helping the government or creating more problem for the government? More problem. So if there are best global practices, NAFDAC should emulate from those best global practices, especially as it relates to recycling. And it is against this background that we are here to appeal to the DG to rescind her decision that have thrown thousands of Nigerian workers out of employment. I don't know what they would prefer. Would they prefer to have a pool of Boko Haram or kidnappers on the street rather than working people that can be coordinated?
You're watching News Central now. We go on a short break. We'll be back. Many thanks for staying with us. We'll now tell you that the President's Chief Executive Officer, Dangote Group, Aliko Dangote, and the Governor of Ogun State, Dapo, Abiodun, alongside other associates, paid a condolence visit to the parents of the late CEO, Access Holdings Plc, Herbert Wigwe, on Monday. Late Herbert Wigwe, his wife, Chizoba, their first son, Chizzy, and former chairman of the Nigeria Exchange Group, Abimbola Ogunbanjo, died in a fatal helicopter crash in California on Friday. Now, Access Holdings Plc has announced the appointment of Ms. Bolaji Agbede as the acting Group Chief Executive Officer. This follows the death of its former Group Chief Executive Officer, Herbert Wigwe. Wigwe died in a helicopter crash alongside his wife, son, and a former chairman of the Nigeria Exchange Group, Abimbola Ogunbanjo, on Friday. A statement made by the company's board of directors and dated February 12, 2024, stated that the appointment was subject to the approval of the central bank. Let's now tell you what we know about the new acting group CEO of Access Holdings, Bolaji Agbede. Ms. Agbede joined Access Bank in 2003 as an assistant general manager and was responsible for managing the bank's portfolio of chemical trading companies. She has nearly 3 decades of professional experience cutting across banking and business consultancy services. She served in different roles at the bank, including head Group Human Resources between 2010 and 2022, before she was appointed the company's founding executive director, business support, in 2022, a role she held until her new appointment. She holds a bachelor's degree in mathematics and statistics from the University of Lagos and a Master of Business Administration degree from Cranfield University, UK, in 2002. She's also a member of the Chartered Institute of Management, UK, and the Chartered Institute of Personnel Management of Nigeria. Away from that, we tell you that Nigeria's parliament has pledged its commitment to push for stronger laws that will help private security outfits contribute to the protection of oil and gas infrastructure across the country. This was as the House of Representatives Special Committee investigating oil thefts and losses paid an on-the-spot visit to Delta State, located in the nation's southern region, for an inspection of vessels recently arrested there. Edong Joseph reports.
According to the Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, over 4.3 trillion naira worth of crude oil was stolen between 2017 and 2020, as the nation suffered about 7,143 cases of pipeline vandalism. Despite measures being put in place, not much has been achieved in the war against crude oil theft. Recently, several arrests were made by the military and private security operatives as vessels were apprehended, while some persons involved were also arrested.
It will amaze you to know that it is not a Nigerian registered ship. It's a Moldovan ship. Some set of persons must have brought it into the country, possibly without registering it or changing the registry, started using it to do business. And the business it was caught with was loading crude oil. This is not the first time this ship is doing something like that.
For those thinking of perpetuating this type of heinous crime against our nation, they should think twice. One, every patriotic Nigerian knows that the government of the Federal Republic of Nigeria needs every drop of oil.
For many in Nigeria, crude oil theft has posed a significant challenge to the nation's revenue aspirations. While lawmakers have expressed concern to what many will call a national tragedy, many are of the opinion that recent successes achieved will not have been possible without the integration of private security players in government overall efforts.
We have seen the suspects are in safekeeping with the Nigerian military. Tantita has done well to, after arresting, also ensure that they hand over.
Continued crises like this, where you have issues of theft, vandalization of pipelines, and a lot of other crises around the oil-producing states, is of serious concern to the National Assembly and particularly to this committee.
I encourage the federal government to encourage Tantita and help them with the challenges so that they can do more, because actually they have done very well.
Lawmakers have also pledged their commitment to supporting government to get the best out of the nation's oil and gas sector. They say this is crucial to helping improve revenue generation. In Abuja for News Central, I am Idong Joseph.
State Agency for Persons Living with Disabilities, Ayodele Adekombi, has called on government at all levels to protect the rights of persons with special needs. The legal practitioner gave this charge at a meeting in Ibadan on Monday. He called on the National Assembly to propose more laws to take care of people with disabilities.
I will want to let you know that it has been long overdue that we persons with disability have been at the mercy of the society, mercy of even the government, without having any right. The society and the government have been operating under the sympathy and the philanthropic model for so many years. Not until now, when His Excellency now said, okay, you have the law to protect you, and we have the full opportunity to fight and get our quota from even employment, services, and every other public service that it affects every other person. Number one thing, major thing that gives us serious problem in the past is the barrier to public building. We have a lot of public building around, including where we are now, for those that are on the wheelchair and those of us that are living with visual impairment to move freely. Our agency has been established by His Excellency to make sure that we'll scrap all the barrier and make all the public buildings, both commercial and government-owned buildings, to make them accessible for persons with disability. Another area is employment. In the past, both private and government sector don't normally employ us based on our disability. But at this time, the law has empowered us to have access to 5% of every employment.
To feel discouraged, I believe
It's time to go all out for the enforcement of 5%. What matters is let our people get what belongs to them, both in private and in public. I will join that crusade so that the position where the special people supposed to be will take them there. And as I too observe it, if you go to any public, it will always be difficult. So it's time to implement the bill.
Still in West Africa, a protest march slated for Tuesday against Senegalese President Macky Sall's controversial move to delay this month's presidential poll to December has been postponed after authorities banned it. One of the organizers of the march, Elimane Habikan, said he had received an official letter from local authorities in the capital, Dakar, that the march was banned as it could seriously hamper traffic. The United States and European Union have called on the government to restore the original election timetable. Deadly protests pitting youth against security forces have threatened Senegal's reputation as a haven of stability in West Africa. In the meantime, the United Nations has voiced concern at tensions in Senegal after President Macky Sall delayed this month's presidential poll and urged swift probes into at least 3 deaths during protests. Sall's decision to push back the February 25 vote plunged Senegal into a crisis which has sparked deadly clashes between demonstrators and the police. Lise Trossel, spokeswoman for the United Nations Rights Office, told reporters in Geneva that the UN is deeply concerned about the tense situation in Senegal. She called on the authorities to ensure that they uphold Senegal's long-held tradition of democracy and respect for human rights.
We are deeply concerned about the tense situation in Senegal following suspension of the presidential election that was slated for the 25th of February. Following reports of unnecessary and disproportionate use of force against protesters and restrictions on civic space, we call on the authorities to ensure that they uphold Senegal's long-held tradition of democracy and respect for human rights. At least 3 young men were killed during protests and at least 266 people have reportedly been arrested across the country, including journalists. Investigations into the killings must be prompt, thorough and independently conducted, and those found responsible must be held to account. The authorities should also ensure due process for individuals arrested during the protests. Amid rising tensions and reports of planned further protests, it's crucial that the authorities unequivocally order the security forces to respect and ensure human rights, including the rights to freedom of expression, association and peaceful assembly. We also urge all actors to refrain from resorting to violence.
Now, Liberia's Defense Minister, Prince Charles Johnson III, has resigned following protests by wives of the country's soldiers who blame him for low wages and poor living conditions in the military barracks. The women set up roadblocks near the capital, Monrovia, and elsewhere in the country, forcing President Joseph Boakai to cancel National Army Day celebrations on Monday. They demanded the defense minister's resignation, blaming him for a reduction in the salaries of Liberian soldiers returning from peace missions in Mali. The officers' spouses also decried a lack of social security, electricity shortages, and corruption within the armed forces. President Boakai, who was inaugurated in January through his office, said the women's grievance would be investigated and addressed. Coming up on the news. South Africa's Minister Pandor accuses Israeli intelligence of targeting her family. We'll bring you more on this when we return. Don't go away. Let's now tell you that South African Minister of International Relations, Dr. Naledi Pandor, has asked the police minister, Bekethele, to beef up her security and that of her family following claims of intimidation and social media targeting against Israeli intelligence. Pando has been vocal in condemning Israel's war actions against Gaza as South Africa took Israel to the International Court of Justice over allegations of genocide. South Africa's case against Israel at the ICJ has been regarded as a landmark moment in the struggle for justice for Palestinians. However, Israel has since ignored calls for a ceasefire. Earlier, senior researcher, Institute for Security Studies, William Els, joined us to discuss this.
Obviously the war or the battle in the court, the international court that is ongoing, but also the war of words that is ongoing between, of course, South Africa and Israel, where the relations are a bit hampered because of this court case. We should also see it as against a backdrop. It was at a side event after the State of the Nation address by President Ramaphosa. That was a political rally that was actually there, and a lot of the rhetoric were on a political level. So we do not know. What we have is the word of the minister that she and the family has been threatened, and she mentioned social media. So what typically would happen in a situation like this is that she should hand over all the evidence to our intelligence service and also to our crimes against the state unit of the Hawks, and they will then investigate these claims, and then based on the credibility of these claims, they will then develop a plan of action that will involve our VIP protection unit, and they will then put in place additional security measures.
Still in South Africa, a nation known for its rich history of resistance and struggle, a powerful storm of voices has risen once again, and over the weekend, protesters gathered at the Goethe Institute in Johannesburg to protest against the support for Israel by Germany and alleged repressive actions targeting artists and cultural workers at the institute. News Central's Bongani Chizoba was at the protest and filed in this report.
As they marched through the streets, their voices echoed in unison, demanding justice, solidarity, and a call for change. These protesters say they are standing united against German support for Israel and the suppression of artistic freedom.
So it is important to keep showing up like today to embassies of that are supporting the genocide or supporting Israel, to all institutions like the Goethe Institute who have a direct influence on supporters of Palestine and protesters against the genocide. We need to keep showing up and applying that pressure until the measures that the ICJ recommend are put in place and a ceasefire is attained.
They say when art is silenced, the pulse of a society weakens and the essence of humanity is threatened. South Africans at the Goethe Institute, this is known as a bastion of culture and creativity. However, it has now become a symbol of disappointment and betrayal in their eyes.
The Goethe Institute is really the cultural arm of the German state. They have offices throughout the world. They work with cultural activists in many countries. And in a number of countries, they have censored, they have silenced, they have cancelled talks, they've withdrawn funding to people who are critical of the state of Israel, an apartheid state, a genocidal state. So we are demonstrating here largely cultural activists, artists, musicians, social movement activists, and we are telling Goethe Institute that they are not independent, that what they are doing is being complicit in the genocide of Palestinians.
From the young ones to the old, the message is clear. They will not shy away from standing up for what they believe is right. And a powerful message for Israel.
My message to Israel is there's no excuse for what you're doing, and it's wrong and it's bad, and You should never be bad like that. It's just too far.
Together, these protesters are paving a path forward, and in their hearts, they bear the struggle of Palestine as they fight for the freedom of artistic expression and demand a world where justice and human rights prevail.
Germany advocates for a feminist foreign policy, but their actions are contrary to what they advocate for. They talk about justice for all and human rights for all, but they're limiting it when it comes to the plight of Palestinians and the genocide that is happening currently in Gaza.
As messages of solidarity continues to resonate across every corner of the globe for Palestinians, echoes of hope keeps fading away. In Johannesburg, for News Central, Bongani Chizoba.
And from South African part, we take you to North Africa, where a Tunisian rights group, Tunisian Forum for Social and Economic Rights, said more than 1,300 irregular migrants died at sea or went missing trying to reach Europe from Tunisia last year. Islam Gabi, a migration expert at the Tunisian Forum for Social and Economic Rights, told a press conference that 1,313 people died or disappeared off the Tunisian coast, a figure never reached in Tunisia. Gabi said at least 2/3 came from sub-Saharan Africa, adding that the toll was equivalent to approximately half of deaths and missing in the Mediterranean in 2023. The UN's International Organization for Migration said 2,498 people died or went missing while trying to cross the central Mediterranean last year, a 75% increase in 2022. From other continents, we tell you that King Charles III's cancer diagnosis has dominated headlines since it was announced last Monday. He has started a course of treatment and will step back from public duties for the foreseeable future. But what kind of treatments may King Charles III be facing? For News Central, Afia Hagen has been taking a look at it.
The news that British monarch King Charles III has cancer sent shockwaves through the royal family, prompting an outpouring of support from the public and heads of state around the world. A statement from Buckingham Palace said, during the King's recent hospital procedure for benign prostate enlargement, a separate issue of concern was noted. Subsequent diagnostic tests have identified a form of cancer. His Majesty has today commenced a schedule of regular treatments, during which time he has been advised by doctors to postpone public-facing duties. Throughout this period, His Majesty will continue to undertake state business and official paperwork as usual. The King was up and about this weekend and attended church at Sandringham. But not much is known about the type of cancer the King has, what stage it is, or his prognosis. This has led to speculation in the media from commentators over what treatment he might choose. King Charles is known to be a fan of homeopathy. He is the patron of the Faculty for Homeopathy, which supports registered medical professionals with homeopathic practice, and he appointed Dr. Michael Dixon, a doctor who has championed herbal and homeopathic medicine, to the head of the royal medical household. Although the King may decide to use homeopathic methods, it's thought he's using these in conjunction with more conventional methods. Buckingham Palace have gone on record saying the head of the royal medical household does not believe homeopathic methods can cure cancer. A statement from the palace in response to a controversy over previous treatment research read, Dr. Dixon does not believe homeopathy can cure cancer. His position is that complementary therapies can sit alongside conventional treatments, provided they are safe, appropriate and evidence-based. So, despite a sense of transparency and openness from King Charles over his diagnosis, we don't know every detail about the type of cancer he has or the treatment plan he has taken. Until this information comes to light, the speculation continues. Afia Hagen, News Central.
Still on this, News Central's international correspondent, Afia Hagen, spoke more about the story.
continues and has been swirling ever since King Charles III's cancer diagnosis was announced last week on Monday. You know, he is a fan of homeopathic methods. He's long believed in the power of plants. You know, he's been talking about sustainability and sustainable methods long before it was trendy, talking about the need to work towards net zero. He eats very well. He famously doesn't have lunch. He's known to have seeds and things with his breakfast. So he is quite in tune with the land, so to speak.
We now tell you that the U.S. Senate has approved a long-awaited $95 billion aid package for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan after months of political wrangling. While Democrats were in favor of passing the bill, Republicans were divided and previously voted it down. The package includes $60 billion for Kyiv, $14 billion for Israel's war against Hamas, and $10 billion for humanitarian aid in conflict zones, including Gaza. In the meantime, Ukraine's president said he's grateful to senators for passing it. U.S. President Joe Biden has been urging Congress for months to hurry through the new aid to Ukraine and U.S. partners in the Indo-Pacific, including Taiwan.
Більшості в Сенаті Чаку Шумеру та лідеру республіканців Мітчу МакКоннеллу за рішучість та морально сильний вибір. Демократія точно вистоїть. Дякую кожному із 70 сенаторів, які проголосували позитивно. Україна дуже це цінує. Це був перший крок. Далі Палата представників, голосування конгресменів там. Очікуємо.
Talking business now, the United Kingdom and Nigeria have signed a partnership agreement to promote trade and investment and open new prospects for both countries. The United Kingdom Minister for Business and Trade, Kemi Badenoch, signed the Enhanced Trade and Investment Partnership Agreement alongside Nigerian Trade Minister Doris Nkiruka Uzokanite on Tuesday in Abuja. The ETIP is the first the UK has signed with an African country and is designed to grow the UK and Nigeria's already thriving trading relationship, which totaled £7 billion in the year to September 2023, according to the statement. Badenoch disclosed that the agreement would open a lot of opportunities for the Brits, as Nigeria is one of the fastest growing economies in Africa. And a bit of sports. The Super Eagles of Nigeria have been conferred with the honor of the Member of the Order of Niger by President Bola Tinubu, who hosted the team to a state welcome at the Presidential Villa in Abuja, following their silver medal winning campaign at the Africa Cup of Nations in Cote d'Ivoire. Despite losing to Cote d'Ivoire in the finals, the team was commended by the president for doing a good job at the tournament. The Super Eagles arrived in the country in the early hours of Tuesday, with the players welcomed by a sizable crowd of people with miniature Nigerian flags as fans cheered as the players descended from the plane.
Yeah.
In the meantime, thousands of football fans wearing orange and white have flooded the streets of Abidjan to see the Ivory Coast team parade the Africa Cup of Nations trophy they won on Sunday. The hosts defeated Nigeria 2-1 to win AFCON for a third time, prompting huge celebrations across the country. Ivory Coast were unlikely winners. They lost 2 group games and fired their manager mid-tournament. Emas Faye, a youth team manager, took over for his first job leading a senior team. The parade began at Hotel Palmier and the crowd built slowly from around midday. At around 3 o'clock, the players appeared on the flatbed truck that would take them on their journey through Abidjan to the over 30,000 capacity Felix Houphouët-Boigny Stadium for a trophy presentation. The celebrations continued on Tuesday with a reception at the Presidential Palace. And finally, the Nigeria Football Federation is set for an emergency meeting to decide whether to extend Jose Pesiero's contract with the Super Eagles or allow him to leave following the conclusion of the 34th Africa Cup of Nations. Pesiero's initial contract was extended to over after the AFCON as stipulated in its deal, which was expected to have ended last year if the championship had held as scheduled from January to February 2023. NFF President Ibrahim Gusau had told the media that the Portuguese's contract would not be extended no matter the outcome of the 2023 AFCON, but some members of the Federation's board started pleading for his continued stay when the national team, against all expectations, marched confidently to the final of the competition. And that's all at this hour. But before we go, let's take another look at some of our top stories. Nigeria's private sector states have faulted Labour's push for 1 million naira minimum wage. UN has shown concern, sought for probe of delayed election in Senegal. We also told you that South Africa's Minister Naledi Pandor accuses Israeli intelligence of targeting her family. Don't forget to send your eyewitness report to the WhatsApp number and email on your screen. You can follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can also watch News Central live on DSTV channel 422, Star Times channel 274, Avo TV and YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I am Lekan Onabanjo.